Welcome, Purdue fans, to I guess we're going to call this episode one of the Boiler Banter podcast with Dustin Schutte. He's the expert, man. He's the boots on the ground there in West Lafayette. I guess I'm just the pretty face asking you questions right now, Dustin. Are we cool with that? Is that acceptable for now?
That's totally 100% acceptable. Yes, I like that.
All right. So I told Dustin before we started recording, I'm starting to get a little bit more tuned in. I'm going to start paying a lot more attention to Purdue. I've started doing that with Indiana a little bit for kind of our parent company, and I've been covering Michigan for a long time. So, like, I'm familiar with Big Ten. I know Big Ten basketball, but day to day, every minute of every day being locked in on Purdue, that's Dustin's wheelhouse. So I'm going to defer to him on everything for a long time here. But I am excited to talk about the best team in the Big Ten. I mean, they've been dominant, especially over the last couple of months. Dustin, we'll get into that a little bit, but they're sitting atop of the standings of a very competitive Big Ten, at least at the top. I mean, the bottom half is not so great, but the top half is pretty damn good. And Purdue is kind of running the show right now and have been for most of the season. So I guess just let's start right there, just kind of where they're at right now. We'll get into the next week in the last 7 games of the season, but Purdue sitting atop of the Big Ten standings and kind of have been like in the driver's seat all year.
Yeah, I think, Brandon, what's interesting is this team was coming into the season picked to win the Big Ten. So it's not necessarily surprising that they're at the top. But when you go back and look at how they played in some of those games in November and December, I mean, they went on in December, they were 2-3. They lost to Texas A&M, they lost to Penn State, and then they got kind of boat raced by Auburn. So you kind of looked at this team and you were like, where are they going to get the production? Their defense isn't that great. The starting lineup wasn't really working. And then in January, things really flipped. And they only lost one game. I can't. I think it was 8-1 or 9-1. I'm off the top of my head. But they inserted Caleb First into the starting lineup, put in C.J. Cox, the freshman, and they really amped things up defensively. And so even in these games where they've struggled to shoot the basketball, there have been games where they go 2 of 12 from 3-point range, 3 of 13, and they've still managed to win games. And it's because they're able to put pressure on the basketball. They've been turning people over. They're able to get out and transition. But to me, I think what's been the most surprising is even though they were picked to win the Big Ten before the start of the season, when you lose the two-time National Player of the Year in Zach Edey, you lose a starting guard who was averaging over 12 points a game in Lance Jones, and then you lose the Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year in Mason Gillis, who was just kind of that quintessential glue guy that Purdue always has. I think even though they're at the top of the Big Ten standings, the way it's looked and the way they've been able to do it has been really impressive. And, they played a tough schedule in the non-conference. They played some tough opponents in the Big Ten. Their schedule is about to get a lot more difficult, and we're about to see just how good this Purdue team is here over the next, basically the next 3 weeks.
How about Zach Edey for the Grizzlies too, man? Who did you as a guy who covers him, and did you see that for Edey in the NBA? I mean, he's there was some back and forth. Is he even going to get drafted? And somebody's going to take a shot on him. You have to because of that size and the touch and everything. And I mean, dude, he looks like he's going to be in the league for 15 years.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Like I thought that. So it seems to me like at every turn, Zach Edey just continues to prove people wrong. So when he was selected in the draft, and I knew when he was paired with Ja Morant, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a pretty good fit for him. But I don't think anybody thought he would be like, now he's got, I think, 6 or 7 double-doubles in the NBA. He had a massive performance when he went back home to Toronto. He's knocking down threes. Like he shot 2 in college, right? And then, but he's been able to really expand his game. And I think what's been the most impressive is the fact on the defensive end. Like you're going to deal with some athletic guys at the college game, but you are dealing with super athletic, talented dudes in the NBA. And his defense has just been, he can guard on the perimeter. He can guard at the basket. Now, he still has to make some serious improvements. But I think a lot of the things that people knocked him for, can't shoot from range, can't defend around the perimeter, all these things that you see these freaks of nature like Giannis Antetokounmpo and some of those bigger guys who can stretch the floor. I think he's going to be able to do that. He's going through a bit of a roller coaster, but he's a rookie. He's still averaging like around 10 points and 7 or 8 rebounds per game, blocking a couple shots. So I would be lying if I thought that his rookie season would be this good. But I don't know that he's ever going to be like an MVP caliber player. But you're right. Like he could be a 15-year NBA guy just because of what he's been able to do and his gradual improvement. And Matt Painter said it all throughout his career at Purdue. Like, this kid's basically in junior high when it comes to basketball,
Mm.
right? Like, he started late in his career. He was a hockey and baseball player. And I know, sorry, Purdue fans, I know you're tired of hearing that after 4 straight years of always hearing about how tall he was on ice skates and everything like that. But yeah, it's really impressive. And it's now kind of quieted the crowd that at every turn has been like, he's not good, he's just tall.
Mm.
And now it's like he's selected to the Rising Stars Challenge. He's one of the top contenders for the Rookie of the Year award in the NBA. So he just continues to quiet the doubters. I haven't gotten to watch him a ton, but when I have been able to watch him, it's been impressive stuff.
Well, he is still huge. He's rocking like the Batman mask now. I think he got clocked in the nose or something, right? He's got the mask,
Yes.
which makes him look even more terrifying. And learning from a guy like Jaren Jackson certainly has to help. I mean, you talk about
Yeah.
these big dudes who can stretch the floor and who he's a great defender, shot blocker, and a pro's pro. It just seems like a really good fit. I mean, I don't know. When he went to Memphis, I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll see. They were down last year when Ja was out and wasn't playing, and now they're one of the best teams in the West, and he's been a pretty big part of it. So, all right, we digressed a little bit. I couldn't just ignore the Edey mention because I've,
Right.
a pretty big NBA fan, and I've been surprised by how well he's done. I think a lot of people have been, and that's pretty cool for him, obviously, to kind of be stepping up even more than, I don't know. I wonder if even Memphis thought they were going to get this much out of him in year one, but it's been pretty cool to watch. So, all right, let's focus on the guys that are still at Purdue. It's funny you mentioned a guy like Mason Gillis, who I feel like from afar, I was like, didn't he play like 15 seasons at Purdue? But you mentioned like he was just like your quintessential glue guy, and a guy like Edey who was so dominant, and now here they are again, just at the top of the Big Ten again. But like you said, about to get very difficult, especially the next week, starting tomorrow night, going to Michigan, then against Wisconsin at home, and then at Michigan State. So like these 3 games over the next week, and then there's 4 games after that. It's a couple other tough ones in there. I mean, at Indiana, yeah, IU's been kind of up and down, but that's a rival game at Assembly Hall. So anyway, the next 3 though, the next week starting tomorrow at Michigan, at home against Wisconsin, at Michigan State. Is 3-0 realistic? Are you trying to just you hope to steal one on the road and win the one at home? Like, what's your thoughts on the next 3 coming up that are really, really tough?
Yeah, I think 3-0 is realistic. I think it's a possibility because I think this Purdue team is locked in,
Mhm.
and I think that they're kind of coming together. Like, a part of the reason why they were having those struggles in late November and then throughout December was because they were still tinkering with lineups. 7'4" freshman center who earned a starting job, Daniel Jacobson, was injured in the second game of the season. But now you've got a lineup that has played together for about a dozen games, and so I think they're really coming together. And as I mentioned, they've won some tough road games just through their defensive effort. I mean, they did not shoot the ball well at all against Washington and Oregon. And we saw Michigan State trip up at USC and UCLA.
Mhm.
Those West Coast trips aren't necessarily easy. But I think if you're Purdue, if you're able to get through this 3-game stretch at 2-1, I think you feel really good about your chances of winning the
Mhm.
Big Ten. Because Michigan State, like, everybody's got a difficult schedule. This is the time of year now when everybody starts playing each other, right? So Michigan State and Michigan, they still have to play twice.
Mhm.
Michigan State still plays Illinois, right? So and I think they still have to play Wisconsin too. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but I think if you get through this stretch at 2-1, I think you feel really good. Now, what's going to be interesting to me, Brandon, we'll talk about this next game against Michigan coming up, is obviously, as you mentioned, like Purdue from the opening tip just dominated the Wolverines. They got out to like a 20-4 lead, and it was just like Michigan couldn't respond. Didn't matter how many
Mhm.
punches they delivered. Purdue was always responding. The defense was fantastic. They were able to turn Michigan over, and I think that's still going to be a big key to this game. Michigan is very turnover prone, and
Mhm.
Purdue has been living off turnovers, getting that ball in transition. But I think there's going to be a little bit more fuel maybe on the Michigan end because in that post game press conference, and I'm not trying to throw anybody over the bus, but if you're looking for that bulletin board material, there was a point when Trey Kaufman-Wren was asked about Michigan's pick and roll because obviously with Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden, like having to defend 2 7-footers in a pick
Mhm.
and roll is not an easy task. And Trey Kaufman-Wren kind of said, I don't know why teams have had so much trouble with it. We kind of saw what was coming and we knew what to expect. And so it makes me wonder, like, Dusty May's a really good coach. Is he going to bring that to the forefront and give a little bit more fuel now to that game now that it's in front of a home crowd? So I'm going to be really interested. I think top to bottom, Purdue's probably the better team than Michigan. But you never know. This is college basketball, and things slip up here and there. So I'm just really intrigued from that aspect because it's always interesting to me. We want players to say what they're thinking, and Trey
Mm.
Kaufman-Renn is a really honest person. I think it's really cool for him to say and give an honest response like that. But it always makes me wonder, like, when you say something like that, how much does it affect what the other team's going to do? Does it give them more motivation?
Mm.
Do they even care? It may not be a big deal to them, and they may just say, "Yeah, he was right." Like they didn't have trouble guarding us, but that's just the interesting aspect of this. And then again, when you lose that game by 30, if you're on the Michigan side, you are wanting to come out and prove something
Mm-hmm.
in front of a home crowd. And by the way, they're still in the Big Ten race too, right? Like they're a half game out. If they win, was that put them a half game ahead or I never know this half game stuff.
What they'd be,
I'm not,
they'd be,
I
yeah.
think
I mean,
they,
with 7 or 6 games to go, they'd be essentially neck and neck. I mean, yeah, whatever it is,
yeah.
they'd be pretty much even up.
Yeah, so my math is never good with the half game stuff. I think they would technically take a half game lead on Purdue with a win. So there's a lot at stake at this game. But again, the way Purdue's playing on the defensive end, Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn have been playing at a completely different level. I think they're two of the best players I think they're both first team All Big Ten selections, even with 18 teams in this league. So it's going to be a fascinating game. Like I think you can make the argument for each of these next probably the next 7 games, right? Because even when you extend past those 3 that you mentioned, Michigan, Wisconsin, Michigan State, then you go on the road to Indiana, you play UCLA, who seems to have figured it out, and then you close out with Rutgers and Illinois. So there's going to be no rest for the wicked for the Boilermakers here down this final 7-game stretch.
I am intrigued by this game tomorrow because, like you said, and like Kaufman-Renn said, like, what's the big deal? Like, if you can figure out the big to big pick and roll, it really does put a damper on what Michigan tries to do. And I mean, shoot, when you lose by 27, like clearly something was working. And like you said, the slow start, Michigan has been known to turn the ball over, and that's a killer against Purdue. But yeah, I mean, there's been other games where Michigan has looked like they could make the Final Four. Like they literally look that good at times, and other times they just can't get out of their own way. And I would assume it would be a little bit different in Ann Arbor. But then you've got Wisconsin, who Purdue hasn't seen yet this year. Then you've got at Michigan State, who Purdue has. It's very interesting, like you said, these tough games. And in the case of Wisconsin and Michigan State, they haven't even played them yet this year. This will be the first time. One's at home, one's on the road. So after the Michigan game, which I would expect that one to be closer than 27, but I'm sure Purdue will probably be favored by a little bit. I don't know what the line looks like right now, but then you've got a home game against Wisconsin, who's they're just pesky always. Like you can't ever take a night off against them. If it was in Madison, it'd be a little bit of a different ball game. I would expect Purdue to win at home. But then you go to East Lansing, and that's as tough as a place to play. So after the Michigan game, what does it look like for the Boilermakers, you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna take just one thing on this Michigan game again. The other thing that's really interesting to me is Michigan wins all their games, it seems, by like 5 points or less. So if this gets in a close game, like Purdue's won some close games too, don't get me wrong, obviously, but Michigan seems to thrive in those moments. So if this game is tight down the wire, does that favor one team or the other? I don't know. That's another intriguing aspect of this game because it seems like in those close games, Michigan has really played well and they know how to finish those games. But yeah, then those 2 games. Wisconsin, as you mentioned, Wisconsin's, I think when you look at the rosters and the production, I think Purdue is the more talented team. But Wisconsin, pick them on a bad day, and they're going to give you some fits, right? Like John Tonji's been fantastic for him. I think Stephen Crowell and John Blackwell have done some really good things for the Badgers. This was a Wisconsin team that I think in December might have been 0-2 in the Big Ten. And so they've really picked it up here recently. I don't think they're a team that doesn't really beat themselves. So what's going to be interesting to me is is it going to be a hot shooting day? It's certainly beneficial that you're playing that game in front of a home crowd, but Wisconsin's a team. They know what they're doing. They know what their identity is. It hasn't really changed that much under Greg Gard. The one thing I would say though is this is a much more prolific Wisconsin offense. I think over the years, Greg Gard in the same kind of vein that Matt Painter has done, like Wisconsin and Purdue used to be teams that would really give you fits on the defensive end. And Purdue's kind of gotten back to that, but they've also adopted and been like, we can't win games 50-45 anymore. Like we just can't. You can't play in today's college basketball and win a lot of games with that method, the Tony Bennett Virginia style model. So I think Wisconsin has done some things where offensively they pose more of a threat. I think again the key is going to be, can Purdue turn them over, get them into deep shot clock situations. But I think and then the Michigan State game is, to me, of the three, going to be the most intriguing. And it's not just because those two teams are at the top of the Big Ten and expected down the stretch, with no disrespect to Michigan or Wisconsin. Those two teams are kind of expected to battle it out for the top spot in the conference. I think Michigan State is super athletic, and I think they are very deep. And I don't know, maybe you could throw Marquette, maybe Auburn in there, or definitely Auburn you could throw. Those are going to be the type. I don't think Michigan State's quite as good as Auburn, but in terms of their athleticism, in terms of their depth on the bench, is that going to give Purdue trouble? Because I think in some of these games, the fact that Purdue can go to the bench and bring in Raleigh Burgess, they can bring in Jakari Harris, they can bring in some of these other guys off the bench that can give them production. Miles Colvin, Camden Heide. I think the bench is going to be a big factor in that Michigan State Purdue game, and the fact that it's on the road in East Lansing. Now, again, I think it's totally possible. I think Purdue's talented enough to go in there and win, but that's going to be, to me, that's why you want to beat Michigan on Tuesday, and then you want to take care of business on your home court against Wisconsin, because if you want to get to 2-1, it feels like those two are the ones that you're going to have to get. Michigan State's going to be, by and large, the toughest of those challenges, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then, I mean, even after those three, we already mentioned on the road against Indiana. Indiana's been very, very inconsistent this year, and I think they've lost 5 in a row now. So that feels like a win, but Assembly Hall's Assembly Hall. That's a rivalry game. That's always going to be tough. UCLA is probably playing their best ball of the year right now. Have figured it out a little bit, but coming east is never easy. It's the same way. You go out west, it's tough. You come east, it's tough. So again, Purdue probably have the edge there. Rutgers, another weird team. Like, they've got 2 top 5 picks and they just can't win like consistently. It's very strange whatever's going on there. And then on the road at Illinois, another ranked team on the road. So like, yeah, I would say I agree with you. The next 3, the toughest stretch, but all 7, you got to show up. And Purdue has been showing up, minus the January 21st loss to Ohio State. They've won every game going back for the last 12, and that's really impressive and hard to do in the Big Ten, as you said. So yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by this 3-game stretch starting tomorrow night in Ann Arbor here, 15 minutes away from my house, which is always kind of cool. And like I said, I've watched Michigan a lot this year, and sometimes they can beat anybody. In other games, they have 20 turnovers, and you're like, what are they doing out there?
Right.
And then you do have, like you said, the motivation from a 27-point loss at Purdue, and Dusty May's got. He just was at Indiana and got a win going back there for the first time, and now his name's being thrown around to replace. Like, there's a lot going. College basketball this time of year is so awesome. It's so fun. Getting ready to close out the regular season with the conference tournaments coming up, and then, a little over a month away from March Madness. So pretty awesome stuff. I think it's funny, too. We're going to talk about Big Ten Coach of the Year potential for Matt Painter, probably in the driver's seat right now. And the 3 guys who are probably battling the most is who he's going to play the next 3 games coming up in a row. Dusty May at Michigan, Greg Gard at Wisconsin, and Tom Izzo at Michigan State, all kind of at the top of the Big Ten, battling each other, like you said, over the next couple of weeks. Painters to lose feels like that right now, doesn't it?
A little bit. I think the fact that when you look at what the media saw and that the fact that Purdue was picked to finish first in the Big Ten, they were thought to have the preseason player of the year in Braden Smith. I almost wonder, fair or not, if that kind of hinders his chances to win Coach of the Year award. But again, I think when you look at what they lost from last year's team and the fact that they're at the top of the Big Ten and the way they've done it, like, they've won 6 of their 11 Big Ten games by 18 points or more. Like, that's impressive stuff. And you have to. Michigan was one of those, right? Like, that was a ranked, really good, as you mentioned, a team that can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament if they get the right draw and they're playing the right way. That was a really impressive win. So to me, I think Matt Painter's at the top of the list, but I think that I put Tom Izzo in there, right? Like, they have been playing extremely well. I think sometimes Tom Izzo gets that old Urban Meyer treatment, right? Like, you have the best players and you've been around a long time, so are you really Coach of the Year? But then Dusty May, obviously, too. The fact that Michigan was so bad last year, and I understand that now in college basketball and college football, like, you can transform a team like that, like, snap of a finger, overnight, you can get that done. But to take Michigan from the last place team in the Big Ten a season ago to now having them competing for a Big Ten title, to me, I think it's neck and neck right there. I think it's Dusty May or Matt Painter right there. Now, if Michigan State turns it on and kind of runs away with the Big Ten, I think you give it to Tom Izzo. And then Greg Gard is kind of that sleeper. Like Wisconsin's had some, I don't want to say down years because they tend to still make the NCAA tournament. They tend to be always, around the top 5, but this team just feels different. When you look at, they lost AJ Storr from last year. They lost Tyler Wall from last year. Connor Esigian was gone. So they had to replace a lot of production. So for them to be tied in the 4th spot with UCLA right now, I don't think a lot of people saw that coming. And they're only, 2 games back, I think, of the top spot in the Big Ten. So, with Purdue's tough stretch, Michigan State's tough stretch, if Wisconsin gets on a roll here, they could be competing for that top spot too. Like, it's just a congested mess. So I think it's one of those years, Brandon, where you have 4 really good candidates, and any one of those who wins it is very deserving of that award. So I don't know if it's Matt Painter's to lose, but I do think right now the way Purdue's playing, as you mentioned, the fact that they had such a strong January and they're carrying that momentum into February, if they go 3-0 on this trip, I do think it will probably be his to lose.
It's funny you mentioned how fast you can turn around a team with Michigan and Dusty May. They won 8 games last year, and but there's nobody on the team that was there. It really is it's a completely new roster, obviously new coaching. It's not even really comparable. I remember, Juwan Howard on his way out, you win 8 games, the lowest win total for the program ever, and now you're thinking all right, Dusty May needs to come in. Gotta get as close to doubling that as you can. Win 16 games, that's a success, and he's already past that. So it's been pretty cool to watch. And now, like I said, you throw in the weird smoke with Indiana, and is there fire there? We'll see. They got to get through the rest of. And he was asked about it directly after the game, which you knew he would be, and so we will see, man. A lot of fun games coming up, including starting with Michigan tomorrow in Ann Arbor, 7:00 on Peacock. I'll be watching it on TV. Excited to watch that one and see how it goes. If all things go to plan for Purdue's perfect plan, you think 3-0 is realistic? Is it possible they can run the table on the way out of this Big Ten slate here? Is that that seems crazy, but when you look at, like I said, their last 12 games and how these next 7, kind of lay out, or there are some tough ones on the road. Are we looking at a possible, just incredible run here to finish out the month of February for Purdue? Is it possible?
Possible, yes. Probable, no.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't think it's going to happen, because even last year, when they were head and shoulders the best team in the Big Ten, they were 17-3. They slipped up on the road against Ohio State when they fired Chris Holtmann and Jake Diebler took over. So I just think the Big Ten, night in, night out, and especially with this 7-game stretch, I think they have 7 games left. I think, again, I said 3-1 through this stretch. I think if you finish the season 5-2, and then that puts you at 16-4, I think you're probably, if you don't win the Big Ten, you're finishing second. I think 16-4 in this league. They were 17-3 a year ago, again, with Zach Edey, Mason Gillis, Lance Jones, clearly the best team in the conference. So I think if you get to 5-2, I think 6-1 is possible.
Do you think?
I just don't think. I think 7-0 is just. I think finishing the year in the league 18-2 is just almost impossible today. With so many teams, so much travel, so many good teams at the top, you still have to play, basically the top 5 or 6 teams in the Big Ten the rest of the way. I think it's just too difficult to ask them to win 7 straight games, or what would be 9, 10. Going back to Ohio
11
State
in a row,
yeah. I don't think that's happening. I think they could beat every team, when you look at it on paper, each team, but I just think they'll slip up once or twice down this final stretch.
Are they going to be favored in every one? Maybe at Michigan State they might not be, but I think they will be in the rest.
I think so. I think they will be an underdog, a slight underdog on the road at Michigan State. The Illinois game would be interesting too, because Illinois is a team that feels like they could score 95, or they will, they'll miss everything, and Purdue could beat them by 10 or 15 on their home court. So I don't know. That's an intriguing one. I think they'll be favored in at least 5. They'll be an underdog against Michigan State, and then for me, Illinois, depending on how that that final month kind of plays out, they could be an underdog at Illinois, but I'd be surprised by that. I think they'll be favored in 6 of their final 7.
There you have it. What a fun time to be covering Purdue basketball. Dustin Schutte is, like I said, he's boots on the ground, clearly knows his stuff when it comes to the Boilermakers. And I got to agree. I think I mean, it feels like 6-1 is pretty attainable,
Yeah.
even that would be an incredible run to finish out the Big Ten season. And then they'd head into the Big Ten tournament looking to win that thing as well. So, yeah, that's man, a little different of a vibe than Purdue football. I'm sure you're happy with that, right?
I'm very happy with that. Football season was rough, but thank goodness we have new personnel in West Lafayette, so this should be more fun.
There you go. He is Dustin Schutte. I am Brandon Brown. We are going to be doing this thing weekly now. Boiler Banter. I like the name, dude. I'm cool with it. Are you good with it? I feel pretty strong about it.
I'm good with it. I like it.
There you go. He's Dustin. I'm Brandon. We'll see you guys all next week. Thanks for listening.